Okay, so she's rolling now.
Nice.
So those who want to watch live can, and when it's all said and done, it'll just be nice pre-recorded on the channel. Okay, so we're rolling now. I'm Hunter Erickson, and here with me is Dr. Dan Erickson, former ER physician and current co-owner of Accelerated Urgent Care from Bakersfield here in Southern California. He just happens to be my uncle, so we were able to snatch him for an interview to talk to us about the national response to coronavirus and how exactly we should approach reopening the economy and going about that in a responsible way. So thank you for taking the time to be here with me. I know that you are on the front line in the testing centers. You have testing centers around California. How's your family been quarantining? How have you been, working amidst the virus and distancing yourself from them? What's been the family dynamic? Have you guys been wearing masks, wearing gloves, social distancing from one another? How's life been working like that?
Well, we've obviously wanted to give the same consistent message that came down from our president, our vice president, Dr. Fauci. I believe these people are put in charge, and I believe we voted for them. And if they come up with an edict and they come up with a plan, I am inclined to follow that.
No.
Initially, it made sense to me. It said, okay, we've got this virus. It's moving through other parts of the world rapidly. It looks like it's more lethal. It looks like it spreads quicker, and it's got more of a respiratory component to it. All that being said, 2 months ago, I said, okay, this makes sense. So we started getting all the protective equipment, the N95 mask, which just means it filters out 95% of the particles in the air.
Okay.
So we all started wearing that. As health providers, I think you need to wear, the best sort of protection. And if you look at the way they test the mask, they put substances through the mask and watch how it's blocked. The N95 is much better at blocking respiratory particles. So we used that. They said, protect yourself from the virus. They said, put masks on patients when they come in. Keep people separate. So we formed lines around our building, and we put 6-foot marks on the pavement. We put tents up. We separated people. We kind of fell in line with what we were asked to do. Families stayed at home. Families now homeschooling. One was already homeschooling already, but now they both are. And so we were doing each step of the way what they asked us to do. And we started testing. And we did the nasopharyngeal swab, because that's what we had. And to date, we've run about 5,300 tests, about 350 positives. It's about 6.5% of all of our tests are positive. So I'm using that data now to try to understand, how much prevalence, how much incidence, prevalence, how many cases, incidence, new cases we have in California, and how should we open up, and should we open up?
Right.
I think that was your question, right? And so I spoke with a super interesting fellow yesterday. His name was Dr. Zoltan. He's an MD, PhD in immunology. Super bright. He explained the details of this COVID virus, the details of why it's called that, the spike structure. And he also explained some super interesting things about why certain people groups get affected by it. And he said different populations, for instance, the African American population has a lot of ACE inhibitors that run. ACE inhibitors are these binding sites, the angiotensin converting enzyme. And I can't describe it like him, but he said certain people groups have a tendency to really hold on to this virus and really get it deep in the lungs and get respiratory problems. So he was just going through the different people groups and how it's affected them. And my question to him was, okay, Dr. Zoltan, that being said, how do we open? Right. So he's, as we speak, putting together a comprehensive one sheet of what we need to do to test. And so far, he's told me we're going to do 2 nasopharyngeal swabs 24 hours apart. If those are both negative and you have no symptoms, back to work you go. So they're going to come up, and then I said, I need specifics for who I'm testing. And he said, I will give you specifics of who needs to be tested. For instance, if you had symptoms in the last 4 weeks, are you having current symptoms? Do you have fever, cough, shortness of breath? Those people are going to be tested.
Now, we've also been hearing that one of the most transmissible times when you have the virus is actually when you're asymptomatic, because at least I've heard that there is a period of time where you've contracted the virus, you're asymptomatic, and it's actually during that period that the virus is most transmissible from you. So is even say something like what he said, testing you only once you've shown symptoms of that virus actually effective for opening the economy when people have probably already been infected all around them for the last 2 weeks?
That's where the IgG comes in. So the immunoglobulin IgG peaks at 10 days. We used to think IgM, M was the initial early peak in the immunoglobulin. So that's the antigen antibody complex that forms. That's how you build immunity in your system. And so 2 days ago, when I met with Dr. Zoltan, he showed me their data and he said, actually, IgM, IgG peak at 10 days. So if someone's had this virus, we check them for the IgG immunoglobulin. We look for that spike, and they pull a vial of blood. They run that in their lab, and if they see that they've developed the IgG immunoglobulin, then we know that they've had it in the past. Are they still contagious? Likely not after 14 days. Although up to 30 days, people will test positive for COVID. However, they're thinking that the viral load, their infectivity drops off significantly in 14 days. And that's where the 14-day quarantine came from.
Okay.
So are we going to test everybody? No, we're not. Most people are either immune and have had the symptoms long enough to where they're not spreading active virus. Are they going to test positive still? Yes, they are. Are they going to spread it to other people? Likely not. Those won't be tested. So you're going to get 1 of 2 tests, or some people get both. If you got symptoms, we're going to swab you. If that's a no, and you want to know if you're immune, we're going to run a tiger top. My thinking is, why don't we just run both side by side? Let's run a nasal swab, which takes 1 to 3 days. We'll run the tiger top 1 to 3 days, get the results back at the same time, and then put you back to work. Okay. So I'm waiting for the specific criteria from Sonic. Sonic owns PAL. PAL is one of the biggest labs alongside Quest in the nation. They have their MD PhDs in immunology. These guys are way smarter than me in immunology. I said, you guys put together the criteria. I'll put together the stage for testing. So that's kind of how we're going to work together. They're going to decide what we need to test and who to test. I'm going to decide the system of testing. So I'm ready for thousands right now. I've been getting my stuff ready, so I'm ready for thousands of tests, both swab and tiger top. We'll run both.
So on that topic, over the last couple of days, we've even seen, say, leaders such as Dr. Fauci and Deborah Birx saying that we need to significantly ramp up our testing capability. Donald Trump, of course, our president, a week or 2 ago, had said that anyone who wants a test can get a test. And he's received a lot of flack for that. And coming from, you here who have been on the ground in the middle of this virus at the testing centers, are you having to turn people away? Are you having to ration out these tests? Can you handle higher capacity, or are you maxed out? I think that'd be helpful for everyone here to know, because there is some mist surrounding those facts.
The swabs were the sort of golden goose. The swabs were the things we were all really trying to get a hold of. I was able to get adequate swabs. Okay. I'm not testing people with symptoms. I'm testing anyone. So someone will say, well, your data's skewed. I'm testing anyone that comes in. It's an adequate sample. If you have symptoms, if you don't. If you feel fine, it doesn't matter to me. I will still test you. Why? Because it gives us a much more accurate picture of the prevalence and incidence of disease. If we know the more people we test, the more accurate our disease becomes. Right. So as you test thousands and even millions of people, the death rate stays the same, but the amount of positives climbs and climbs and climbs. So this death to prevalence ratio gets smaller and smaller. If you test a small amount of people, you test 100 people, it looks like a really heavy death rate. If you test 1 million people, you see about still the same amount of deaths. In California, what is our death rate? We've had, I believe it's about 1,500 today. We've had 39,009 tests total, 1,500 deaths out of 39.4 million people. And people say, well, how many people in California have COVID? I say, well, let's just look at this. We have 39,009, which is the denominator. The numerator would be 1,500 deaths. Right. That's 3.9% of the population. So statistically, you can't just take that and extrapolate it out and say, we have 3.9% of 39 million. Right. I have used a predictive model saying, okay, if we did that, I had a higher model. I had a 12% model. So I was calculating that California has somewhere between 3 and 5 million cases of COVID. If that's true, because we're just using the numbers we have. If that is indeed true, and we have 1,500 cases out of 4 to 5 million, your chance of dying from COVID in California is about 0.02%.
Just tiny.
It's,
Minuscule.
and as I went nation to nation, I looked at their numbers and I said, okay. And then people say, well, look at the amount of cases we have in the United States. It's up to 45 to 50,000 now.
Right.
Okay. I'm always going to compare it to flu, and I'm always going to compare it globally.
Right.
So I look at California because that's where I think most of our discussion needs to be California. We have 1,500 documented cases,
right.
and we're on lockdown. Is that a good model?
Right.
Let's compare it to a country that didn't lock down at all.
Right.
So,
well, as far as the standard goes for continuing this lockdown, we were told at the beginning of this entire economic lockdown, at the beginning of this entire mandatory quarantine, that the entire purpose was a short-term lockdown in order to slow the spread, or, as they were saying in the White House press briefings, to flatten that curve. According to what you have seen, do you believe that we have significantly flattened the curve? Do you believe that we have significantly slowed the spread? Or even, the spread has slowed in a lot of places. Do you think that that spread is all attributable to the lockdown?
The best way to answer that question is Scandinavia. Norway, the motherland, and Sweden. They're similar in geography, where they're located. They're different in the fact that Sweden locked down, Sweden stayed open and Norway locked down. What does that mean? Sweden is still in schools. They still have things going on. People social distance in Sweden. If you watch their live coverage, they have masks on. The restaurants separated people. They did some social distancing, but they didn't lock down. They allowed the people to kind of control their own safety. In Norway, they said, we know what safety is. Did it work? You could say yes, and you could say no. Why? You look at the caseload in Norway. Norway had, when I studied a couple days ago, it was 150 deaths out of 5.3 million. Sweden has 10.4 million people and had 1,700 deaths. Aha, you see, lockdown works. You have to look at statistical significance. 10 million people had 1,700 deaths.
Right.
5.4 million had 150 deaths. When you look at the entire country, these aren't statistically significant. 150 versus 1,700 deaths. You wouldn't say, well, that was a massive success on Norway's part. They had a few less deaths. Yes, they did. When I studied a couple days ago, it was about 1,200 more in a country of 10.4 million. So I guess that's not for me to say, but the numbers say it did help a little bit for Norway to lock down. Did it help it enough to justify the collateral damage? What's the collateral damage? The collateral damage is all the other things that happen that wouldn't have happened had we kept on with our daily lives.
Right.
The businesses that closed, the people that have no work, the weakening of the immune system as we separate.
Right.
Is the collateral damage worth the slight gain in safety, the slight reduction in death that we saw Sweden versus Norway? That's the question I pose.
Right, and those are some fascinating observations. In the U.S. here, have you seen a flattening of the curve since these lockdowns were implemented?
I'm studying my own data, so we're seeing kind of a steady uptick. We've been doing tests for 2 months. We're at 350.
Okay.
So it's kind of just like this kind of slow plateau. We've not seen an exponential curve.
Is that in cumulative cases, or is that in cases tested positive day by day?
The 350 total positive. It started off slow, 5, 10, 15 a week, and then it increased up a little bit, but we haven't seen this sort of frenzy of positive tests. And we're testing thousands. So I think even though our data set is small, I think to some extent you can extrapolate it to Kern County. Kern County has probably upwards of 600,000. The greater Kern County, absorbing all areas, is close to 1 million.
Right.
So I think that COVID is really widespread. And then I have to ask myself, if we shelter in place, does that prevent COVID from coming into your home?
Right.
And my thought process is we have to talk about the fomite situation, where when you go to Costco, Home Depot, you go to Del Taco, you're picking up plastic things.
Right.
And my research tells me that COVID lives on plastic for 3 days. So if you're a Costco worker and you're stacking water and you sneeze onto water bottles, I come behind you a day later and I pick those up and take them home to my shelter-in-place family, and they grab the water bottle. You have a fomite transferring COVID, touch in the face, COVID infection to a shelter-in-place person.
Mm-hmm.
How do you stop that? Are you going to unpack the plastic and spray it all? You ever tried to clean a plastic bag?
Right.
These are nearly impossible. Spray, spray, spray. The bag's full. The fomite, that it's called a vector if it's alive. It's a fomite if it's an inanimate object like a water bottle, right? It has virus on it that's moving into your home. So you have all these plastic pieces moving into the shelter-in-place family.
Right.
Who thinks they're protected.
Yeah, and that has a lot even to do with the entire concept of a quarantine, because the entire approach to the mandated quarantine that we've seen around the US, at least to me personally, hasn't made a ton of sense, because it seems that either we're going to say everyone is sheltering in place, everyone's quarantined, no exceptions. In that kind of case, it makes sense. Yeah, you're probably going to avoid getting that virus because there's no possible chance of this virus leaping really from house to house. I'm not saying that in any educated way, but it doesn't make sense that it would spread at all if everyone's totally locked down at home. But that hasn't been the approach, obviously. Yeah. The approach has been you have to stay at home unless you have to leave home, which hasn't made a lot of sense, because then you are going down to Costco, and basically it seems that the quarantine becomes ineffective. So maybe you could kind of talk about the values and the limitations of quarantine, because I think a lot of people, especially after, let's say, listening to you, they might have the idea that you think that quarantine's a bad thing. I don't think that you think that quarantine is all bad. I would think that you would say that quarantine is actually good in some cases. But maybe you could explain for those who are these limitations of quarantine, and how the quarantine that we're seeing right now deviates from really the traditional way of quarantining the sick versus the healthy.
Well, yeah, and we brought this up on our press conference the other day, because I said a quarantine, when you have a measles child, mm-hmm. you don't say, and there's 10 people in a room, you don't say, quick, grab all the healthy people and put them in a house. You say, grab the kid with measles and isolate him. Mm-hmm. That's always been the way it's been. When you had a leper in days of old in biblical times, they didn't say, everybody go hide in your home while the leper hangs out. No, you move the leper outside the city. You isolated the disease. Mm-hmm. So I think quarantine can work, but what I've seen, I'll just take you through my day and you tell me if this makes sense. Mm-hmm. I had to go down to Costco and get water for the business. I walk into a center, nobody's wearing masks. There's hundreds of people milling about, coughing, sneezing. We're all sharing germs. We're all transferring credit cards and moving bugs around, building our immune system as we normally do. I grab my water bottles that have been sneezed on and stacked by people that are asymptomatic bottle shedders. I grab my plastic and I move into my car and I put my possibly COVID covered items in a box. Then I stop by Sully's gas station on the way home. Nice place. I decide to get a beverage out of the container that was stacked by an asymptomatic shedder. And then I walk around and none of their employees are wearing a mask, and I ask them for some of the donuts. And they gladly hand them to me as they breathe their respiratory droplets onto my donuts and shut the lid. And then we swap germs as I pay for it. Then I walk out to the gas pump that's open and I grab the handle that's possibly covered in COVID by an asymptomatic shedder. I'm a little hungry, so I stop by Del Taco. I look in the window, there's 5 employees wearing masks. And they're using a paper-type plastic product to wrap my burrito in an asymptomatic carrier that's possibly shedding on my burrito that has no symptoms. And then I go to my place of work and I strap on a PPE mask and I protect myself from COVID. And then I say to myself, oh, it's lunchtime. I'm going to go to Cafe Rio. Cafe Rio's not open, see, because it's not safe to go in there. But it was safe to go to Costco and Sully's and Del Taco. But Cafe Rio, I can't go into and sit down and have a burrito while social isolation. Mm-hmm. So they've picked and chosen what is safe. And then if I want to go to the park and social distance, that's not safe. But it is safe to go to Costco and social distance to pick up things I really don't need right now. So we see this inconsistent social distancing. Right. This yes for you and no for you, and yes for you and no for you. If it's going to quarantine, what you'd say is you'd pull up to Costco, You'd hand them a list through the window. They would go do it and come out, and you wouldn't interact like we do. You would make it a strict thing. But that's not what we've done. We've picked and chosen which things we think, like isolating at the gym 6 feet and doing that, that's dangerous. But you and I can be on the same aisle in Costco talking about the lack of toilet paper, and that's okay. So I think most people would agree there's lack of consistency in quarantine. I think if you're going to quarantine, let's quarantine. And if you're going to open, then open. When you do this sort of hybrid thing, where they're picking and choosing things that can be open, or even a surgery. You know, my brother-in-law is an orthopedic surgeon, and he was told he's non-essential. And he's got people with, hips that are locked up and they can't walk, and he has the ability to put in a new hip and help them walk, and they've told him that's not essential. But yet, certain businesses are open that you could be considered non-essential as well. Bike stores are open because bikes are essential transportation. Does that make sense to you? That an orthopedic surgeon cannot repair a hip, but a bike store is open. Essential transportation.
So it seems to me that quarantine in all of its orthodoxy would actually be a good solution. But it's either you're all in or you're all out. And it seems that, to me at least, that we're trying to marry this, okay, shelter in place, but you can kind of go do other things, if you want to. It seems from what you're saying that that's not a possibility. You're either going to completely stop the spread by an across the board, no exceptions quarantine, or you're not. Would that be accurate?
It is accurate, and I'm not answering this question. I think we all just need to think about the collateral damage of quarantine versus the effect of the virus.
Well, could you talk about that? Could you talk about what the effect of this kind of quarantine is? Quarantining both the sick and the healthy in the way that we are.
Well, this is, people are going to say, how do you prove your statistics? That's a common question I get. Patients call me, and I called today for anxiety medication. They're at home. They're anxious. They're fearful. Some people don't think that living is worth it anymore, so they're getting suicidal ideation. They're asking me for alprazolam. These are anti-anxiety medications. Can you fill this? I'm nervous. I'm anxious. They're getting thoughts that life is not worth living. I had that happen to me today, by the way. I've had patients who call me because they all have my cell phone. A lot of them do, anyways, and they're saying, I'm trapped at home. I don't want people to bring me food. My anxiety is climbing. What is my answer? Anxiety and fear, mental illness is starting to creep into people's minds while they're staying at home. That's a significant thing. It's not often talked about, but it's ruining people's existence. A lot of their value comes in producing. I think God made us to produce and do things every day and not kind of sit trapped somewhere with nothing to do. I think that tends to breed some unhealthy behavior habits. Sedentary behavior breeds obesity. It breeds anxiety. It breeds depression. And there's a whole host of things that I think everybody's pretty aware of. The oil companies laying off tons of workers. We do a lot of work for the oil fields. So these young men, these young, strong, virulent men have no work. They're at home trying to fix their house, trying to do something, trying to prove their worth. So it's causing this really strange time in society. And that's a handful of the negatives. And we could go on for a long time about all the industries affected. People that are calling me for work. I can tell you one of the reps that's been with Henry Schein for years just got furloughed. What a nice word for no money for you, go home. It's such a nice word. It's not a nice word. It means go home, no money for you. And you might have a job when you come back. I can tell you about a second person who was high up in a medical company, made $180,000, sent home, no job, no money. That is stressful. That is anxiety. That is real world, them at home saying, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to feed my family? These are the direct things in the last week that I've seen that are causing a significant negative impact on the society around me in Kern County.
Well, Yeah, there seems to be a lot of effects of this. Earlier, you had even mentioned the immune effects of staying at home and distancing from one another. What I've heard over the last couple of days, even at the White House press conferences, is that there could be some problems come the fall when you have more spikes of COVID in conjunction with spikes of flu.
Mhm.
It seems from what you said earlier that not only are there going to be, big economic effects that have massive collateral damage to American society, but even our immune systems being distanced from one another now, not only is it going to make us more vulnerable when we come out to COVID, but it seems that come fall time, from what the experts are saying, it's going to make us more vulnerable to COVID and flu. So what do you have to say about the immunology and people strengthening their immune systems? Because it seems that in a sense, we're trying to have our cake and eat it too here. We're wanting to quarantine to stay away from being exposed to this virus, but at the same time, we're weakening ourselves so that when we have to come out, which we're going to have to come out at some point, we're going to be weak and not be able to fight it off. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I like to, I go back to my microbiology 101.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to my immunology and my biochemistry. I took years of biochemistry and microbiology and immunology. And I like to use the baby as an example because I think it talks about the immune system.
Right.
If you take a baby that first comes out, in the first 3 months, when a child comes out and has a fever, it's difficult.
Right.
I'm doing blood tests. I'm doing lumbar punctures. I'm doing urine tests. I have chest x-rays. I'm doing a litany of things, trying to figure out, you know why I do that? Because a child doesn't have a well-developed immune system. Mm. They will oftentimes have hidden things and they're not able to fight it off. So I'm ultra cautious those first 90 days. I'm not missing that pneumonia. I'm not missing that UTI. I'm not missing that blood infection. I'm not missing that CSF infection. I've done lumbar punctures on hundreds and hundreds of babies. Why? Because they don't have an immune system. So as a child develops, they're on the floor, putting stuff in their mouth, virus, bacteria, antigen comes in the body. Immune system goes, okay, I recognize that. IgG, IgM, immune complex formation. And then it forms memory of that. And when you see it the next time, I know what to do with this, no problem.
Right.
But the first 3 months, big problem. We don't know what to do with it. So as you develop more and more, you develop an immune system by exposure to antigens. That is microbiome immunology 101.
Right. So it seems like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, I just say if your argument is that putting people and separating them makes them healthy, then why is it that if you take a child from 4 months to a year, you put them in a bubble suit and bring them out, they're frail, they're weak, their immune system is not strong enough to fight off a typical virus. But yet now we're saying, let's go ahead and put adults who develop immunity the same way, let's isolate them.
Right.
So I say, there's 2 ways you kill a virus, right? Mm-hmm. How do you kill it? You let it burn out, or you herd immunity it. Herd immunity requires a herd. Mm-hmm. You push people together, which is what society does. You bring them together, a few people die, most of us get over it. And that's what happens with flu. Well, what about the vaccine, they say? Right. The vaccine is helpful in about 33% of the cases. The virus will mutate. Mm-hmm. And most people, not most, maybe 50 to 60% will take it. The other 40 to 50 don't want it. Right. So you don't have this exacting way of controlling the virus. Right. And the vaccine itself, i.e. influenza A, influenza B, right, change. I've gotten the flu shot and I've gotten the flu. Well, how is that possible? Because it doesn't prepare me against all mutations of influenza. They estimate every year. The brilliant immunologists and scientists get together and they look at the virus coming through and they build a vaccine based on what they think it's going to do. Mm-hmm. And then it changes and it mutates as it goes through and it gets actually weaker through the flu season. Right. But we never look at the flu season as in 2017, 2018, when we were seeing a lot of sickness, hospitals overwhelmed in death. We never said, you know what? Why don't we send everybody in their homes and tell them not to come out? sometimes we'll say to people, unless you're really sick, don't come out because we're mingling too much and this thing is going crazy.
Right, but it's left up to them to make that
Yeah,
decision.
it's left up to them. It isn't up to the government to tell you what behavior is safe and what behavior is not safe.
Right.
When you have a novel or a new virus, people get excited. One of them, my neighbor's out here is a virologist. He's like, I've been studying coronavirus since 1973, which is a great year, by the way. And he said, this is a new coronavirus, but we have some understanding of viruses like it. This is a novel coronavirus. It has different structure to it. And so we wanted to get prepared and we would rather over prepare for bear and have squirrel show up than prepare for a squirrel and bear comes knocking the door.
Right.
Everybody understands that.
Right.
So I appreciate their initial model of shelter in place, social distancing, wear a mask. I do appreciate that to some extent. And then a part of me also says, well, if we had just let things go and done more of a Sweden model and didn't have the collateral damage, what would our caseload look like in California? That's an important question to me, because they're pushing the necessity of shelter in place, and I'm saying, shouldn't we look at places that shelter in place and say, wow, didn't that make a big difference?
Right.
Wasn't, and it is effective. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying, is it enough effective? Is Sweden enough different from Norway to necessitate the collateral damage of shelter in place and business failure? Does it make enough sense?
Right. And so I guess, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here, because a lot of people say, but look at New York. New York, is this hotbed, there's thousands of people dying. What would you have to say there when it does seem to be scary, deadly there? When people are seeing, videos of people, being buried in these graves on Hart Island, it can look pretty scary, especially when the news is, pumping all of this out to us every single day. And we're going, oh, I don't really know what's going on in New York there. That's a little bit scary. Maybe you could talk about that as a hotbed, maybe compared to the rest of the country. Because at least to me, I see the need for individual responses. It seems like we need to have a different response for Manhattan, New York, than we do for North Dakota, which has been the case. The governor of North Dakota has been far more lenient, far more like Sweden in her policy than has Andrew Cuomo of New York. And so maybe you could just kind of speak to that and the fact that New York is the exception in this case, not necessarily the rule.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. New York State has 19 million people, and they have about 19,000 deaths, which is a lot of deaths. Every death is terrible. Obviously, I think they've got, if I was an ER doctor in New York, I would be thinking differently. If I had my ER full of COVID patients, my ICU full of respiratory failures, I would be exhausted. Those guys are working 14, 16 hours a day. They're intubating people. They're putting them on vents. It feels apocalyptic to them. And they're in a hot zone.
Right.
I would be feeling a lot different as they, you'll see some ER doctors in New York saying, I buried 6 people today. Like, that was one shift. Right. That feels devastating. That feels apocalyptic almost.
Right.
And I've had days like that in the ER. So I think that where you practice definitely skews what you think. How well was your hospital prepared? Did you have enough vents? Did I haven't worked in an ICU. I haven't worked in an ER. I've been working in urgent care. So I listen to I read the stories online of what they're going through. And I think their perspective is very different because they're in a hotbed. They've seen a lot of death from it. And I think they also have a different system. In California, we travel independently in cars. In New York, they ram together in sort of the sardine type fashion in a tube underground. That's a hotbed for disease. That's a petri dish. That's a COVID dream right there. Right. Just moving through that subway. They're going to have much faster,
transmission.
They're going to have, the disease progression is going to be radical. Right. When people they live on top of each other. They travel on top of each other. In California, we're spread out. Right. Where my business is in Kern County, even more spread out. Right. We're in our individual cars. We go to individual homes. I don't see us having. I don't think the proximity of people will have the same, we won't have the same disease outbreak.
Right. And I even saw a study as recent as today that, according to studies, 94% of the deaths in New York City are attributable to underlying conditions. And that kind of takes me to, I think, the next question that I want to ask you, because as we open this free economy, I don't think anyone's proposing that we just flip the switch and we all go, to Angel Stadium. We all go, to the NFL games. I don't think everyone's, saying, hey, go to your country concert and be standing shoulder to shoulder, coughing and breathing on one another. That doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. It seems much more realistic to be letting, certain people go back out and quarantining others. What would be your position on, okay, these are the people that we should be putting back out into the public that are able to build a strong immune response, compared to these are some immunocompromised, immunosuppressed people that we need to be taking care of?
Well, you mentioned 95%. That number is important because globally we see that about 95% of people get better with COVID and don't die from it. I think that's an important thing because my numbers support that as well. New York had a higher, I think their recovery rate was about 92%. The numbers I'm getting are about 96%. Norway, 97%. Some countries, 90%. So between 90 and 95% of people recover from this.
Right.
So who should we protect? The people we should protect, in my opinion, are the people we always protect. Elderly, immune compromised, people with chronic disease should, in general, not go into areas where there could be a lot of germs going around. If I'm on an immune suppressed medication, and am I going to go in a place and sit with people that, at a ball game? Maybe not.
Right.
That's not maybe good for me. But again, that's also their choice. I don't think I think my rights stop at your ability to make your own decisions. If you're immune compromised and you want to go to Angel Stadium and have a hot dog, that's not my job to tell you you can't. And I think that's a super important point for the medical community, is that, people need to control their own health.
Right. I have a question actually about that, because this has become something that is extremely controversial, especially as we see a lot of protests and a lot of states, protesting these lockdowns. You'll have these individuals, going out in the public at these protests, going to the store, not wearing masks. And you have these people pointing at, these protesters and these maskless individuals, saying they are, exercising their right in such a way that it violates the rights of others. They are, flaunting their rights recklessly, getting other people sick. They're putting lives at danger by exercising their freedoms. What do you have to say about those people? These people that aren't wearing their masks, because the media has been pointing and just screaming at these individuals who aren't wearing masks. Are wearing those masks in public? Are these social distancing measures? Are they effective? Are these people who are going to these protests, not wearing these masks, endangering the lives of others? Because this is a question that I've seen all over the place, and it goes across the aisle. It goes across the opinion on how we have to respond to this virus. People are very concerned about, violating social distancing measures and not wearing these masks. What have you seen as far as the effectiveness of these?
Well, I'm taking everything you ask me, I throw against the backdrop of my experience. I throw it against, managing flu patients for 15 years. I throw it against years in the ER. I throw it against what I know to be true. And what I know to be true is that right now, about 95% of people will recover, even if they're COVID positive. And we have this unknown classification called asymptomatic spreaders. We don't know how many they are. We don't have the testing or the data to make a real articulate answer about what you just asked me. I can hypothesize, but what I like to do is lean on the facts of what we know, lean on the recovery of what we know, and then compare it to the flu, which we know really well. Right. I think that's actually the most effective way to answer it, because you say, okay, if I have 95% chance of recovering from this, how afraid should I be? If you've ever had the flu makes you feel real close to death. you're febrile, you're confused, you're delirious, like you feel awful, your body aches, you're just like, you feel terrible.
Right.
COVID can make you feel terrible. My pastor had a flu-like illness in December. He was negative for flu, body aches, fevers, delirium, chills, exhaustion, sweating. He likely had COVID. So should people be allowed to go out and gather? I think the question is, during flu season, should people be allowed to go out and gather? Because this has some more lethality to it than flu. In New York, we're seeing more lethality. It moves faster. It's more respiratory driven. People get on ventilators. 80 to 90% of people that get on ventilators don't get off ventilators and usually die. It's not like ventilators are the life force saving people.
Right.
A ventilator means you can't handle your own breathing. You are filling up with secretions. You can't oxygenate. So you need this positive pressure in your lungs to help you breathe. So I think I'm giving you kind of a long-winded answer, but I think the answer is during flu season, if people want to protest, flu is being shed by people that have low symptoms. And most people get over the flu, but some people die from the flu. Should every flu season we say that protesting is illegal because you might be shedding virus to me? There's a natural innate danger when humans get together. I don't know what you have, you don't know what I have. And you sometimes don't even know what you have.
Right.
You're an asymptomatic shedder.
Right.
So should we have drones that have the technology now to heat sync you and check your pulse? We have a pulse of 122 and a temperature over here, grab it. Is that the society we want to live in?
Right.
We have the drone technology to do that. Is that the society we want to live in?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And so I'm saying there is a risk to being human. There's a risk to protesting. There's a risk to driving your car. There's a risk to leaving your house. And you should be the one making that decision. I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, I think
it's
a great way to answer that question with a question. Because if we're going to apply the standard that many are wanting to apply to COVID, it's going to be logically consistent. It's going to have to apply to areas that we are used to, completely violating that standard in all the time, every year. So it does kind of seem to go along with your entire idea of with your entire idea there, really of I'm totally losing my train of thought.
Right, we were comparing it to flu.
Right,
and
comparing it to the flu, exactly.
And so I think what we have to do is, you've heard the term throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so what I'm trying to do with all this new information is compare it to what I already know and say, what do we already know about disease? What do we know about viruses? What do we know about flu cycles? Let's make sure that we're comparing this to that. And let's make sure that if we're going to do lockdown, social distancing, and economic demise, let's make sure it's worth it.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's the huge question that I always end with is that collateral damage? Is it worse than what the flu is causing? And if so, why are we doing it? Or if the COVID deaths and disease are a lot worse than the collateral damage,
right,
then it makes sense. But if the collateral damage is much worse than the COVID disease and death process, then why are we doing the shutdown of the economy?
Exactly. And it goes back to the very beginning where everyone was saying, okay, we need to make sure that the cure isn't worse than what we're trying to solve here. And it seems that definitely to a degree, it's starting to look like our cure is worse, possibly than COVID.
And what are people sacrificing? I mean, let me ask you. You're a young, smart guy. What are you going to be sacrificing? Is your college going to open up next year?
Right.
Maybe not.
Right.
Your college might actually say, you know what, Hunter? We were looking forward to you, but actually we're going to do online classes now.
Right.
No college experience for you. You're going to learn remotely. I know you've done a lot of remote learning already, but you were probably looking forward to going to your school and right?
Right, exactly.
So your life is going to have consequences. The SAT for many juniors isn't happening.
Yeah.
The standard achievement test that equilibrates us all across the country is now not being done.
Right, exactly.
So there's this big pile that's happening. I'm calling it collateral damage that encompasses all this negativity.
Right.
And we have to take a long, hard look at that collateral damage and say, was this collateral damage worth saving this amount of disease process?
Right.
That to me is the biggest question.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I want people to think about the countries that have locked down and the countries that haven't.
Right.
Look at the collateral damage and the disease damage and decide which model is better for us.
Right. It seems from what you've said and what we've just discussed here that the collateral damage is far outweighing the damage that we would have to simply mitigate if we didn't lock down. So I think, one of the kind of more closing questions here that I want to ask you is, how do you propose that we open this economy back up? Because, a lot of people right now are saying, if you even suggest that we should open the economy back up, you don't care about lives.
Yeah.
You don't care about people dying.
You're a wild man.
Yeah, you're a crazy gunslinger. Exactly. You've been called that. You're a crazy gunslinger. I'm sure that you would want everyone to know that you are concerned about lives. Of course, I think all of us are. But small businesses are dying. We're getting close to 30 million files of unemployment here in the United States. I mean, we can't think that that's not going to have massive sociological effects and negative effects on our society. Some of those you cited earlier. So eventually our policy, of course, is going to look a lot like Sweden, a lot like North Dakota, where we're going to isolate the vulnerable and the rest of us are going to have to go back out in the public. So how do you suggest that we ease back into that? And how do you think that we gauge when to do that?
Well, and that's going to be state by state. I don't think it's rational to say we're all gonna do the same thing, because you've got massive prevalence, massive incidence of new cases in New York. They still have a lot of new cases. They have a lot of death. They, to me, need to take a different plan. So I think you have to answer that question by geography. Where do you live? I live in California. So I'm going to say in the state of California, we have about 1,500 deaths. We have 39,009 tests as of today. I know that changes every couple of hours, but that's what we have out of 39 million people. That being the case, let's make decisions for California that are responsible, that protect human lives and decrease collateral damage. So how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm relying on the immunologist to give me a set of criteria for these people need to be tested, and here's how we test them. I think we're going to test them by 2 nasal swabs 24 hours apart. And who needs to be tested? Are we testing every child? No. They're giving me a list, and I will probably have it tomorrow. So I'm going to defer to them because they have been studying this and are coming up with exactly who needs to be tested, and that's what I'm waiting for.
Right.
Because everything else for me is a little bit shooting from the hip, because I'm not the one pulling the levers. They're the PhDs in immunology and the microbiologists of these various labs are getting together saying, these who we need to be tested in society, this is how many we need to test to feel safe that we've controlled it and we have enough data to study and put people back to work. I'm waiting for that. So I don't want to hypothesize or just sort of shoot from the hip when that's not my area of expertise. And I've already talked to the experts and I'm waiting for their email to give me that one-page criteria of who gets tested, how much testing we have to do, how do we get back people back to work, and then when we go back to work is up to our governor.
Right.
Governor Newsom is the one who's going to control that decision. I've talked to our head of public health. He said it's going to come from the governor. Mm-hmm. So it's not under my control. My job is to get ready for testing. And so people have said, well, you're just trying to test everybody. I'm trying to get ready. So when Governor Newsom says it's time, I'm ready to test and get people back to work.
Do you think that we need to test everyone? Because, even Anderson Cooper the other night was saying that, according to this Harvard study, we need to be rolling out like 40 million tests. These massive numbers that don't seem really realistic given our current capacity. Do you think that we need to be testing everyone like some of the people in the mainstream media are suggesting, just hearing what you were saying there?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's feasible. I mean, you look at other countries. I look at the burnout rate and herd immunity.
Right.
I think we have to study those that have gone before us. China, Hong Kong, Norway, Sweden. These people that had much more prevalence of disease much sooner than us, and say, what did they do? How did it work? Did they reintroduce? Did it work? Did they do it too soon? So I'm looking to their model and saying, if they're reintroducing people back into society, you're going to get a spike in disease.
Right.
I would expect that. As soon as you bring people out of their cocoons and we all start sharing viruses again, I expect a disease spike, 100%.
Right.
So that is inevitable.
Right.
So to say that's a reason not to go back to work is a little bit confounding to me, because that's going to happen no matter what.
Exactly.
Whether we test for it or whether we don't, the diseases will spike. So I want a rational approach where we test people that need it.
Right.
If you got the disease 3 weeks ago and your IgG, you have no symptoms, and we test your IgG and you go back to work, we don't need to test guys like you.
Right.
We need to test people that are going back to work in a specific industry, congregating together, that have a symptom. Let's test them.
Right.
Or if they work in a specific industry where they're dealing directly with food items or that are shipping internationally, they're going to have criteria for who gets tested.
Right.
We don't have the ability to test everyone. Although the Tiger Top tube we're using is ubiquitous, all the hospitals have it. We use it for basic blood work. They all have it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's nice. That's for immunity. We still don't have, well, I'll say this. We just figured out, I say we, when I'm talking about the lab, not me. We meaning we're all figuring this out together. We're now using a nasopharyngeal swab in normal saline, which is a very widespread medium. We used to have a specific medium we were using. Now we're using normal saline, which is everywhere. So I can swab your nose, stick it in this little vial, put a cap on, label it, put it in the fridge, send it to a lab, test comes back in 1 to 3 days. That test is fairly easy to manufacture and produce. So I think we can get, thousands of those, no problem. We can test everywhere.
Okay.
So I think we have the ability now to do enough testing. So once the criteria from the immunologist comes down, these people need to be tested. We've figured out how to set up those tests. And then the governor comes back and says when we're going to do it, and we all work together to move the system back in a moving order. It's not a make a decision, everybody runs back to school. We're going to figure out who needs to be tested,
right,
what age groups, what worker types, test those people, and then move us all back on slowly. I think that's a rational approach.
Right. So looking back over our conversation here, it seems that kind of the narrative that you projected here, the outlook on our response to the virus kind of looks like this. The current mandatory quarantines don't make a lot of sense. We're telling people to shelter in place, but to go out into public when necessary. In that going into public totally nullifies any effect that a real quarantine would actually have. So we're actually gaining hardly anything by these economic lockdowns, medically speaking. Number two, these lockdowns are destroying the economy, and it's going to inevitably destroy lives, have massive collateral damage. So we're having no real effect on the spread of this virus, the flattening of the curve. Number two, we're incurring massive collateral damage, and that this virus has tapered off a bit, in that in areas like California, it seems like a realistic thing to start moving healthy people with strong immune systems back into the economy, into the working force, while isolating those that would be vulnerable, that we would have protected in the first place. So that way we can open up the economy. That seems to make a lot of sense, but I've heard even over the last 24 plus hours since you had your press conference in Bakersfield, a lot of people saying that you have a financial stake in this. I mean, you're one of the first people to come out and really give us this take on the coronavirus. We haven't heard this anywhere else. So I think a lot of people are naturally a little bit skeptical, especially seeing that you do have a financial stake in it. What would you say to those individuals that think this narrative is unique to you simply because of financial motivation?
Well, I am an essential business, and I have been open the whole time. And I would say this: I've listened, talked to, and read the stories of ER doctors in different parts of the country who have no financial stake, and they basically have a similar opinion of, in my state, our disease prevalence is fairly low.
Right.
In different areas of Wisconsin, and different ER doctors that I've read about, they're saying, okay, depending on where you're located,
mm-hmm.
if the ER has a low case rate, if your ICU is empty, if your floor beds are not impacted, and you've been dealing with this for a couple months, Why are we continuing to do this? And we're also setting up a model for the future. I think your synopsis was really good. One more point I would add to it is we're setting the bar for the future. So every year, if we have a new virus that comes out, are we now going to shut down and lock in place for months? This is not a sustainable model globally, in my opinion. And people without vested interest in the economy still have vested interest in public health. I tell people, I took an oath. My number one oath is not to the dollar. My number one oath is to my patients and to my employees. But my number one oath, the Hippocratic oath, is to do no harm to patients and to make sure they get the care they need. That's my number one motive in everything I do, is to say, what does the patient need and how can I serve them? Hands down, that's far and above anything I do in my life. Mm-hmm. Far and above business or anything else is what is the best move for the patient and for my staff and for my state and for my country. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. It's a world leader. It's very serious to me how we deal with this, because as California goes, so goes the nation. With 40 million people, a $2.7 trillion economy, all kinds of technology and developments come out of California. For that reason, we need to be very cognizant of the influence we have over the other states. Mm-hmm. We're a massive leader. There's not even a close second. Mm-hmm. You know, the next state, you know, is a trillion behind us for GDP. So I say California, we need to be very careful how we do it this year, because our model and how we handle it this year will set us up for the years to come. So we need to get it right.
Yeah, well, I think that's a wise opinion, and I think that it's a wise approach to this virus. So I'm just going to give you a second to look at those who are currently viewing and those who will view, and just to give them the message that you want everyone to hear. Could be 30 seconds, a minute, however long you want to take, but just to look into that mic, look into that camera, speak into that mic, and give all of those who are watching and will watch the message that you want Californians to take away from this, and the message that you just think Americans in general need to take away. How ought we to approach this?
Well, I think the most important thing I can say is we have to look at two things. We have to look at the virus. We have to look at how many cases we have. We have to look at the death rate. Every death is terrible. We don't want any more death rate than we need to. And then we need to balance that against the collateral damage. And we need to take these two things and say, how do we strike a nice balance between protecting our freedoms, protecting our workers, and protecting people from COVID-19? What is a rational approach? And I'm not necessarily going to say what that approach is. I think a rational thought is we need to have a balance between the two, to where we don't completely crush the economy if we don't have a high prevalence of disease. If we notice, for instance, in California, where we have, today the numbers I noticed were 39,000 tests, we've had 1,500 deaths, and then you have to ask yourself, as someone who's done a lot of autopsy, what did they actually die from? A large amount of people, I've read upwards of 80%, have multiple comorbidities. So they have congestive heart failure, hypertension, diabetes. They have a list of things, and also COVID. And some doctors, there's been a little bit of pressure to add that to the diagnosis base. During a flu season, when someone dies of, let's say, pneumonia, we don't necessarily try to add flu to their diagnosis. So I think we have to be careful to realize people die from multi-organ failure, they die from a lot of things, and just because they had COVID as well, that's not necessarily the reason why they die. So I think my basic point is, let's look at these two things, and let's take a rational approach to testing the appropriate amount of people so that we can get them slowly back into society and get things moving again at the right time. The governor will decide what the right time is. My role as a physician and as part of a hospital system is get ready for testing and give people the right message to get them healthy and back to work in a reasonable and healthy fashion. So I guess that's my bottom line message is, and that's what my role, I feel like, in California is to listen to our leadership. I think, God puts people in leadership positions, whether I voted for them or not, I respect their position and I respect their authority. And my job is to function within that authority. So I'm not trying to go rogue and have a different opinion. I'm trying to operate within that and also use my analytics to understand both the results of the collateral damage and the results of the disease and help us get back on track, understanding both processes.
Well, I think it's a good reminder, as our second president of the United States, John Adams, once said, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictums of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts or evidence. So I think both Dr. Dan Erickson and I can both exhort everyone to go look at the facts and come to your own conclusions. Go to your governors and your state leadership, write them, ask them to do things. Don't necessarily go rogue, but ask them to make decisions based on the evidence. That's all we can do responsibly right now. Look at the evidence and draw conclusions. So, well, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for the time, and thank you for being part of the healthcare system that's been responding to all of this and being on the front lines.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who watched. Again, I'm Hunter Erickson, interviewing Dan Erickson of Bakersfield. Thank you.